Sydney, a city at ease with itself. Here's an interesting fact I read on the long flight to Sydney from the States the other day. According to an article in the science section of the New York Times, every hour the average person sloughs off 60,000 skin fragments, 160 million motes of dust, and 20,000 particles of clothing lint, among rather a lot else. No wonder my seat was a mess when I got off the plane. On my flight there were 397 passengers, all slowing away for 14 hours. That means that between us we left behind 111 million clothing lint particles, 889 billion dust particles, and enough skin to make at least 2 new humans. That's quite a lot to ask of the cleaners, isn't it? When you consider that on the day in question, Friday, mine was one of 958 flights to come and go at Kingsford Smith Airport, and that I was just one of some 28,000 skin-slowing passengers. The numbers clearly don't bear thinking about. I mention this because the very first person I saw when I alighted at the airport on Friday was a petite Oriental cleaning lady who did not look at me in the doleful, quietly embittered way of airport cleaners in all the rest of the world, as if to say, "Do you know where I'd like to stick your skin flakes and lint, mister?" But beamed at me with a 1,000-watt smile and said, "Welcome to Sydney, sir." In the course of the next 10 minutes, I was welcomed to Sydney by 7 people more, all of them seeming to mean it. What's more, instead of taking most of the morning to get through the airport, as I had stoically expected, I was out incomfortably under an hour. I am still so dazzled by the numbers that I must repeat them here. At 6:40, my plane touched down. At 7:08, I cleared customs. At 7:13, my bag tumbled onto the carousel. At 7:18, I was stepping into a cab. On what was supposed to be the most chaotic day in the airport's history, I passed through in 48 minutes. My little regional airport in New Hampshire handles 4 flights a day of no more than 16 passengers each, and they still can't get you in and out of the airport in that kind of time. And so it has been everywhere I have gone since. Sydney has been gripped by an efficiency and friendliness that are a wonder to behold. The city has been behaving as if hosting an Olympic were the easiest thing in the world, and quite a lot of fun too. Of course, the proceedings have barely gotten underway, and there is no telling what might happen in the days to come. But so far, and goodness me, it has been nothing but one happy story after another. The weather has been dry and mostly glorious. The transport system has coped ably with the demand. The 2 Koreas walked together at the opening ceremonies, warming the hearts of millions. Australia appears to be on course to win about 800 medals, raising local spirits immensely. Everyone everywhere seems to be having a wonderful time. There have been, it must be said, one or two well-publicized hitches, most notably with visiting bus drivers getting lost. Some commentators have even made comparisons with Atlanta, where many drivers famously took their passengers on long, inadvertent tours of the outer suburbs and North Georgia hills, but the comparison isn't very fair. For one thing, not one driver at Sydney is called Bubba. Moreover, the Sydney problems have been more in the way of introductory hiccups, whereas at Atlanta, many athletes were made hours late by hapless driving, and one actually missed his event altogether. Nothing of that magnitude has happened at Sydney or is likely to. It is salutary, and if not salutary, at least entertaining, to recall that at this early stage of the last Olympics, Atlanta was coming to pieces in quite a comprehensive way. First, there were the celebrated problems with the computers, which led to many interesting deviations from reality, as when a boxer from Uganda was listed as being more than 19 feet tall, and a German swimmer found himself transferred to the Ghanaian squad. Then there were the many security lapses, of which perhaps the most memorable was the fellow who was noticed sitting in the stands at the opening ceremonies with a gun in his lap, patiently awaiting the arrival of President Clinton and several other heads of state. He and his trusty firearm had somehow managed to pass undetected through two metal detectors and a bag check. My own favorite, however, was the occasion at men's basketball match when the Georgia Dome was plunged into darkness for 12 minutes after a technician pulled the wrong switch. Now I know almost nothing about electrical systems, but I am nearly certain that if I pulled a switch and a basketball arena was instantly plunged into darkness, it would not take 12 minutes before I wondered what would happen if I pushed the switch back again. In comparison with all this, Sydney has been a clear triumph, and nothing has better captured the spirit and quality of the proceedings than the opening ceremonies. I don't know how they were received in Britain, still less how they came across on television, but I was there, and I have to say they touched and dazzled this cynical old heart. Speaking personally, I thought it was splendid that Rick Bartsch, the show's director, filled the proceedings with Australian cultural and historical references that no foreigner could possibly understand. All over the world, there must now be billions of people who believe that, according to Aboriginal Dreamtime tradition, the spiritual cleansing of Australia led directly to the development of the Victor Longmore and a craze for very vigorous tap dancing among the young. I can't pretend that I understand the half of it myself, but I am certain it was all a good thing. At least it has provided the world with some new Australian images that don't invoke kangaroos, crocodile Dundee, or lugubrious half-wits drinking Castlemaine for 20 at dusty outback pubs, and no one seems to have remarked on the significance of bringing the indigenous people onto the very heart of the best and biggest show Australia will ever see. It's been a sensational start. I can't wait to see what happens next. U.S. writer's way of mark. An Australian of my acquaintance who has lived in the United States for many years once told me that when she was nearly arrived in the country and working at a school somewhere in the Midwest, the headmaster came up to her with a curiously flummoxed expression. He was clutching some papers to do with a student exchange program for which he needed to send a letter to Melbourne. I hope this isn't a dumb question, he said, but what month is it in Australia? It was then she told me that she realized just how off the radar Australia is for most Americans. Even the most basic matters of Australian life are terra nullius, as it were, for the great majority of my countrymen. I would hate to guess what proportion of them could confidently identify the Australian capital or point to Queensland on a map or name a single living Australian novelist or two dead ones, or even correctly pronounce Brisbane, but in my experience it is not terribly large. Indeed, my experience includes recently meeting an American couple who had just been to Brisbane and still didn't know how to pronounce it. They thought it was very nice though. As I sit here, I have before me a travel article from Newsday, one of the largest newspapers in the United States, cheerfully identifying Sydney as the Australian capital. I could go on and on. So the Olympics obviously represent a golden opportunity for some of America's most gifted and thoughtful commentators to rectify this regrettable shortfall in our knowledge. Unfortunately, they've sent sports writers instead. I'm sorry, that was a terrible joke in extremely poor taste. Let me say at once, in mitigation, that my father was a sports writer and a man of intelligence and discernment, and I have no doubt that there are many others like him. But equally, it must be said that sports writers as a rule are not the most sensitive and appreciative of world travelers. These are people who like their comforts to be reliable and uncomplicated, for whom the word stylish and nylon are not necessarily incompatible. Anything foreign is bound to unsettle their cautious sensibilities. Even so, some of their observations in recent days on the nature and quality of Antipodean life do bring the dedicated Australophile up short. In this respect, I believe Mr. Frank Fitzpatrick of the Philadelphia Inquirer may be without peer. After noting that Australians are friendly and likable people, he warns his readers, just don't ask for coffee. The stuff brewed here tastes as if it was scraped off the Great Barrier Reef. The problem, it transpires, it is that Australian coffee is too strong, one might even say too flavorful for Mr. Fitzpatrick's careful palate. Alas, most matters gastronomic down under are a disappointment to him. Food in general seems to be a problem, he writes with a touch of sadness. The sandwiches are thin and inedible. Worst of all, bagels are virtually non-existent. It had never occurred to me that any human beings could possibly regard eating in Sydney as an ordeal, but there you are. As the saying goes, it takes all kinds to make the world go around, though perhaps some shouldn't go quite so far around it as others. Miss Sally Jenkins of the Washington Post, meanwhile, was not at all captivated by the Olympic opening ceremony. An ice capades without the ice was her cogent assessment. This I could just about bear. I like the ice capades, but when she rounded on that sweet and beloved Goldilocks little Nikki Webster, the little girl who starred in the opening ceremony, I fear she lost my vote for the Pulitzer, particularly when she wrote, "After an hour and 40 minutes of this, I wouldn't have minded one bit if her mother had screamed like Meryl Streep, 'The dingo ate my baby.'" Kangaroo jokes have become something of a motif in many reports, nowhere more notably or indeed bewilderingly than in a weekend report from the Houston Chronicle, which began with this arresting passage. "This morning I saw a kangaroo in my pajamas. How he got there I'll never know, but the place is teeming with them. The streets are literally jumping. Never mind taking a taxi in from the airport, mate. Just toss your luggage into the pouch, hang on to the ears, and well, hop a ride into town." And what does any of that mean exactly? It means that jet lag can sometimes be a terrible thing. As you would expect, many correspondents have found Australia's rich and colorful lexicon a source of both entertainment and mystery. Several have provided glossaries in which they explain such puzzling terms as larrikin, jillaroo, and even bloke. I particularly treasure, though I am not entirely sure why, a carefully phrased assertion in the Los Angeles Times that women in some parts of the country are known as Sheilas. However, my most cherished find was a breathtakingly innocent explanation in the Detroit Free Press of what a nameless Australian basketball player meant when he reportedly called American Vince Carter a certain word that rhymes with banker. The correspondent was not closely enough acquainted with the term to provide a full and literal interpretation, but proposed instead that it appeared to mean jerk, which is certainly close enough for me. What is most surprising and frankly disappointing is how few correspondents have perceived Sydney as a special place. Of those whose coverage I have seen, only Bob Kravitz of the Indianapolis Star seemed actually smitten with the city. There could not be a better stage for the first Olympics of the new millennium, he wrote in a curtain raiser for the Games. Sydney today is spit and polished. blithe spirit, blithe spirit of a city, almost impossibly beautiful, poised to show itself off to the world. Elsewhere, however, you would scarcely guess that there are grounds to suppose that Sydney has a certain enviable attractiveness. Perhaps these working visitors are just too busy to notice, but it does seem as if there is a curious reluctance to engage with the city any more than is strictly necessary. I think possibly the most extraordinary fact I have seen so far in these games was the mention in the bulletin last week that NBC, the American television network, brought 7,264 kilograms of Starbucks coffee to Sydney to keep its staff caffeinated in the American style. I wonder if they might spare poor Mr. Fitzpatrick a cup and possibly a hostess Twinkie or some processed cheese if anyone remembered to pack any. It's going to be a long dozen or so days till we all get home and can get some real food again. Souvenirs more about dollars than cents. Before this Olympics, the biggest public event I had ever been to was in 1990 when some dear people at the Sunday Correspondent, the late London newspaper, sent me to the Super Bowl football championship in New Orleans. There I discovered what an exceptionally congenial life you get to lead if you are a credentialed journalist attending a large, well-sponsored event. Upon checking in at the press headquarters, I was presented with a stylish canvas bag full of small presents, notebooks, pens, commemorative pins, and the like, and an envelope packed with invitations to dinners, lunches, breakfasts, brunches, product launches, and cocktail receptions hosted by the various commercial patrons. I would hate you to think that I am so shallow that an assortment of large corporations can buy my goodwill with cocktails, a lavish buffet, and a press kit containing assorted nifty keepsakes, because they most certainly can't. However, I do very much appreciate it when they try. The upshot is that by diligently attending every function on offer, I ended up with enough pins, pens, notebooks, binders, canvas bags, and other mementos to keep me in Christmas presents for, so far, 10 years. Naturally, I assumed that Sydney would be much the same, but alas, such largesse appears not to be on offer here. I must say I was a little surprised, because it seems to me that if there is anybody who understands the pleasure and appeal of unearned gifts, it is the organizers of the Sydney Games. But in fact, this has been a pretty thin event freebie-wise. Happily, I haven't gone entirely without. In common with the 110,000 other people at the opening ceremonies, I did get a nice large case containing an odd but interesting assortment of trinkets, a commemorative pin, a pair of socks, some stickers, a plastic flashlight with which to annoy people in adjoining seats. the Sydney Morning Herald graciously gave me, possibly in lieu of money, several articles of clothing bearing the company's logo, a polo shirt, rugby shirt, baseball cap, and nylon rain jacket, all of which naturally I wear with pride day and night, so I have not gone entirely without. But it occurred to me that I had nothing to take back to America with me in the way of real Olympic souvenirs. Then I read an article in the money section of the Herald telling you how to make a killing by buying the right memorabilia. Essentially, the trick seems to be to buy something, wait for a century or so, and then cash in. If, for instance, you had bought a poster called Joe Olympic at Athens for half a drachma in 1896 and looked after both it and yourself, you would find it now worth 1,450 Australian dollars. So, motivated by both a healthy lust for profit and an earnest desire to take away some worthwhile memento of this greatest of all Antipodean gatherings, I took to the streets of Sydney to shop. Well, goodness me, what a lot of stuff there is out there. There isn't a thing you can't get. Name me any item at all, be as preposterous as you want, and I can guarantee that somewhere in Sydney it is on sale with Olympic rings on it, at a price roughly double what you would consider outrageous. I saw tea towels, bath towels, shirts, umbrellas, cargo pants, baseball caps, yachting caps, bath mats, boxer shorts, jerseys, sweatshirts, t-shirts, fleeces, soccer balls and basketballs, breezer bone coats, and much, much more, all with Sydney 2000 proudly emblazoned on them somewhere. I wanted something a bit unusual, and in a novelty cake shop called Sweet Art in Paddington, I believed I had found it. It was a cake in the shape of the head of Juan Antonio Samaranch. Surely the first time in many years that he has looked good enough to eat, against a backdrop of Olympic rings, and with a small shark in the foreground leaping from the water as if about to go for his jugular. Alas, the cake, I was informed when I stepped in to make inquiries, was neither for sale nor actually a cake. It's styrofoam, explained the shop assistant, so we can use it again, she explained further. I said nothing, though the thought did flit through my mind that the day when there will be a fresh need for Juan Antonio Samaranch cake to promote an Olympic Games in Sydney may actually never come. So how much would it be if it were a cake and if it were for sale? I asked. $800, maybe $9. We agreed that this was quite a lot, even for a once-in-a-lifetime occasion, and parted on good terms. In the end, like nearly every other visitor to the city, I ended up in the official Olympic store on Pitt Street, an ever-crowded emporium containing every possible type of souvenir. I was particularly taken with the Dawn Fraser and Mary Rose DNA sets. These are a set of commemorative pins, each containing a genuine particle of the DNA of Australia's two most revered swimmers, priced respectively at 160 Australian dollars and 200 Australian dollars. The young man behind the counter wasn't sure how they got the DNA out of the Olympic stars, though he was pretty certain they hadn't had to be strapped down or anything. Nor could he tell me why Mr. Rose's DNA was 40 Australian dollars dearer than Mr. Fraser's. Alas, both 160 Australian dollars and 200 Australian dollars were more than I was prepared to pay for a set of pins, though I conceded that it is not every day you can purchase unnecessary materials with which to clone your own Olympic champions. "Have you sold many of these?" I asked as I moved on. "We've sold lots of everything," the young man replied, looking frazzled. "We can hardly keep most of this stuff in stock." The only part of the store that wasn't terribly busy was the mascots section. I don't know why, but every Olympics these days has a mascot. Moscow had a bear called Misha. Nagano had some cute snowflake creatures. Atlanta, I believe, had a person being shot on a street corner. And now Sydney has mealy, sod and oily, or whatever they are called. In any case, they have been a bit of a flop, which is not altogether surprising because they are very, very naff, and anyway, mascots always are a flop because they always are very, very naff. I've just remembered that the Atlanta mascot was called Izzy, as in "Is he dead yet? Is he still breathing? Is he got any money on him?" Anyway, that's why I bought one each of the Sydney mascots. Reality value, you see. For decades to come, every house in the nation will have an Olympic plate on the mantel and a commemorative cup sitting proudly on a shelf. But I alone will have the mascots. You may think I am a sucker, but believe me, a century from now, when it comes time to cash in, I'll be laughing.